Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. It has been our endeavor at BYJU'S to help and support IAS aspirants at every stage of their preparation. Now, when IAS Mains Examination 2021 is over and students are gearing up for the last leg of this prestigious examination, that is personality test, we are back again to assist them, forming an opinion and insight about multiple topics and issues concerning our great nation and its body polity. Like last year, we have meticulously curated a series of special talks and lectures to help our would-be steel pillars of this nation in their personality test. In this special series, we invite the stalwarts of our nation, eminent personalities, renowned civil servants, academicians, intellectuals, to address the young aspirants of UPSC Civil Services examination and guide them by sharing their views on significant topics chosen carefully from various spheres of knowledge. That is Indian economy, India's foreign policy, internal security, our judicial system, public policy, ecology and environment, etc. When we started this series last year, we received overwhelming response from students in general and those preparing for their personality test in particular. This series will help you to get ready and give finishing touches for the final stage of your examination and provide you with pragmatic insights to maximize your score. Today we are joined by a senior award-winning independent journalist who has a rich body of work in English and Hindi, spanning across prominent newsrooms in India, Smita Sharma ma'am. In more than 17 years of journalism, she has worked with print, television and digital newsrooms, including the Tribune, CNN IBN, IBN 7, India Today, Aaj Tak, DD News and TV9 Bharatvarsh as a prime-time anchor and foreign policy in charge. Presently, ma'am is working with India Ahead as contributing editor and also she is visiting faculty at Kautilya School of Public Policy. Welcome to BYJU'S IAS, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
We are really honored and privileged to have you in our series.
Likewise, you really have had esteemed speakers and I feel very humbled to have been invited to join
Thank you, ma'am.
the likes of those speakers.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the first thing that I would like to know from you, that the conventional wisdom with regards to a world order driven by functionalism is being preceded over by narrow self-interests, where a nation's short-term goals are taking primary seat and the rule-based world order or any respect for international treaty, that is taking rear seat. In this situation, how India can balance its interest and also retain the image of a responsible power?
Well, you've hit a sixer right at the beginning with that question. I think, first of all, hello to all those tuning in as well. When we talk about the traditional concepts of functionalism versus realism, we need to understand the concepts. And when we talk about functionalism, that found its roots in international organizational cooperation, especially in health of science, education, I would say it's not really a current phenomena that functionalism has been taking a backseat. After the World War II and from 1949 till say around 75, we did see functionalism in a way being the epicenter of the international global order. There was a large-scale consensus of the Keynesian theories of trying to put in international cooperation in sectors where you thought it could move towards a market failure. But when you look at what we're talking about today, narrow self-interests, I would actually widen the word, and what we are seeing is realism. And when people tend to define realism simply through the prism of narrow self-interests, I do have a little problem, because if you look at the dictionary meaning of realism, whether it's the Oxford Dictionary, the Collins Dictionary, what you'll find is realism being defined as an approach where you are pragmatic, where you are level-headed, where you understand the facts of a situation and current developments, and don't let really your feelings kind of cloud your processing of what is happening.
Right.
So in many ways, what we are seeing today, we see realism in several quarters of the world happening, where people do understand that they have to put their national self-interests. This is happening because of several reasons. A, it is a world that I would say is in a lot of confusion. And I think in world orders, in the way the world works together, every few decades, there is a massive shift that does happen. Nothing is constant forever, even in international orders. So the traditional understanding of an international liberal order, that is changing. Even a country like the United States, they're not sticking to that same old worldview of liberalism, which is why we saw the rise of somebody like a Donald Trump. Of course, he came down, and now it's Joe Biden. But it has changed the way even the US is today perceiving or approaching international liberalism. Because the world is adrift, we have also seen the rise of a lot of strongmen leaders. So if you're looking at an Erdogan in Turkey, if you are looking at a Putin in Russia, a Xi Jinping in China, many here would argue that Mr. Modi himself is a strongman. Maybe not as authoritarian given our democratic structures and systems. With these rise of strongmen and personality cults, they are either trying to fight for what they believe is their rightful place in the world order on the global high table, or what they think was an imagined past, which many would say in the case of Russia or China, the past glory. So when you combine these factors together, I think what we are seeing today is a world that obviously is following way more realism, and the world has changed in many ways. You saw the growth of non-governmental organizations that came about that challenged the traditional security institutional architectures that were working in different sectors. Corporatization has happened. The monopoly of states over markets, that slowly ended, which was one of the functional sort of key points for functionalism when you were talking about.
Right.
So the society that we are talking about today is a very different society from what was there in the 40s or in the 70s. With the internet era, with the online era, the entire concept of civil society and its participation in political movements too has changed in many different ways. So in all of these constructs, when people are still struggling to find a new world order, I think what India needs to do, to come into the second part of your question,
Right.
Whether you call it a non-aligned position or you say that I'm now following a strategic autonomy, we cannot dismiss off our non-alignment position, which a lot of countries today still continue to follow, including us in many positions. But there is a difference between completely condemning friends and speaking up if the behavior of the friend is wrongful. Say in the Ukrainian crisis that we are talking about, I think India has shown a lot of moral ambivalence. I do understand, and I'm sure we can talk about the complexities of the relationship with Russia in the conversation. But to start with, if on the one hand, domestically, you are positioning yourself as a Vishwaguru, you are saying that you are the mother of democracies, but you do not even clearly call a war as a war or a Russian invasion as an invasion, then it is a problem. And when you deal with realists and strongmen, my personal belief is that people will only respect you when you stand up on occasions. So, I'm not saying that India should go ahead and join the US-led West in a sort of a mob lynching, name-calling, passing the judgment on Russia. Don't do that. Of course, protect your national interests. If the evacuation process is on, it has to be a priority to make sure that your citizens come out first, and the safe passage has to be worked out only when you have the Ukrainians, the Russians, and the other stakeholders on board. But your moral ambivalence going tomorrow, in future, may lead you to a position where you may find yourself in the wrong side of history. And that you cannot afford to do. I mean, if tomorrow the Chinese escalation in LSE really goes up, you would want the world to unequivocally come and condemn what you see as an unilateral attempt in trying to alter status quo, or an unilateral aggression in trying to alter your, or change, or impinge upon your sovereignty. The world too would expect you to do that. So I think for India, the things to do would be, of course, make sure that your intelligence assessments on the ground in a changing world is improved. You put in more resources, you put in more money. We were caught unaware when the Taliban took over Kabul, like many other countries. Here also perhaps we didn't see, which is why the Indian advisory wordings were very weak and very mild compared to some of the Western countries in the initial few days. Of course, we did a fabulous job in evacuating our students through a live war situation. But if you look at the advisories that were sent out initially, the languages of it were very mild. The 15th February advisory saying that we would ask the students to consider leaving. So the students who were there for essential studies, who couldn't lose out on points in the university if they were to attend online classes, they were confused whether there was essential stay or not. So somewhere with your friends more so, rather than saying that I want to be neutral in a way where I will not offend either side, you will end up offending all sides. If you speak the truth at some times, your friends will respect you. Don't be a pushover. But speak out where it is necessary. And then I think we have enough diplomatic clout and experience and very talented people here to say it in a way which is diplomatic. So these are some of the many things. I mean, you have to, of course, you need economic growth. You need your security build up externally and internally. You cannot compete with the likes of a China in checkbook diplomacy. So just don't, don't just tom-tom on your soft power. They have limitations. And realize the limitations of personality-driven politics. You may have as many international informal summits with a Xi Jinping, with a Putin in exotic settings. They'll have their limits when it comes to actual hard, muscular policy on the ground. I would leave it there.
Oh, great. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, recently most of the Asian nations, they abstained from voting for the sanctions imposed on Russia. Do you find it is a rise of new NAM in Asia, where it considers the Russian-Ukraine war as essentially an European affair? Is it an European affair?
It is an European affair territorially, but with global implications. I mean, today there was this movie Babel, and I cite it as an example of the global interconnectedness. The sequence of events in that movie, if you were to go through, it shows how a gun, finds its way all the way somewhere from Japan to Algeria to Iraq, how events and affairs are, and it destroys lives in the process. Completely people unfamiliar with each other. So if today in India, you're looking at a sharp fuel on fire crisis, and now with elections over, we're all bracing up for that moment when the announcements are made. So your global crude oil prices are affected. I mean, look at Germany. Of course, Nord Stream 2 has gone for a toss, but countries like Germany, despite a new leadership in an Olaf Scholz, who's trying to, of course, come out of that shadow of the Merkel era, they're announcing that we cannot switch off from the gas supplies from Russia overnight. It's going to be a long-standing affair. Now, in terms of the UN abstentions, see, while this was the third time that India had actually abstained, in a span of almost 5 days.
Right.
Because we first did it with the Security Council resolutions. And then in the General Assembly, there were overall 35 abstentions, which included India, China. But in South Asia, if you see, it wasn't like everybody abstained. So you had our smaller neighbors, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives, that actually voted for the resolution. So smaller countries, but one could say and argue that there is a considerable US influence too on these countries, that's beside the point. They chose to exercise for the motion. Even countries like in Afghanistan, which is under the Taliban control, or Myanmar, which is under the junta rule, these countries also actually voted for the resolution. So within South Asia, India was one of the rare countries. Of course, we had Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka also abstain on this. So I wouldn't say it's really a non-aligned movement to go with because of this vote. But countries are choosing their sides very carefully. And countries are abstaining where they think that they would rather sit neutral or sit on the fence. Within Europe itself, if you look at the response of countries, say for instance, Austria or Sweden, they've all chosen to be relatively more neutral. They're looking at their own interests. Look at the way the Israelis have actually gone ahead with the situation. Prime Minister Bennett has literally gone ahead on a shuttle diplomacy. He spent the Shabbat weekend, which is a big thing for Israelis, meeting up in person or speaking on the phone several times over with the French President Macron, with Russian President Putin, with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, with the German Chancellor Scholz. And he has been, taking that safe position because there are Jewish communities in Ukraine, in Russia. So again, what the Israelis are doing, despite all the machismo they tend to bring on tables when it comes to issues, say, involving in Iran or others, the Israelis understand that in the Middle East, they have striking air supremacy. But this air defense can actually be battered by the Russians, who are already involved in Syria. You're looking at reports of Syrian fighters being brought in by Russians to be included in their troops. Today you have reports across newspapers of how the Foreign Legion sort of committee that they have formed of foreign fighters, it's a dangerous move. Because there are people who are going in to join these forces, much as our hearts go out for the Ukrainians, and we feel for the Ukrainians, and I don't mince my words in saying that this is an invasion. This is bloodshed that has been caused by Russia, despite the India's traditional positions with Russia. But when you look at these foreign fighters coming in, it almost looks like you haven't learned your lessons from what was happening in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, because many of them would actually be mercenaries. So to say that this is simply a European affair, it's a European affair because, yes, when it comes to the positions of influence, China will not be able to come in here. Right. China's influence is limited. If something were happening in, say, Northeast Asia, we would see China more active. But China wouldn't be holding that kind of an influence with the Europeans. But all countries today, I don't think, like the UAE changed positions. The UAE initially had actually abstained in Security Council, but later on they changed their position in the General Assembly and they voted for. Right. It's a fluid situation where each country, I think, is looking at it on a case-by-case basis and, of course, looking at their own interests in the decisions that they make.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, these days, lots of students who appear for their personality test, they prefer IFS over other services. So it would be a very relevant question if you could address that what are the immediate challenges for Indian diplomacy in its neighborhood. We have now the concept of extended neighborhood as well. And how IFS, Indian Foreign Service, can be a daunting but a fulfilling career in the years ahead.
Well, I think when it comes to the immediate challenges, of course, the neighborhood concept is not something that has been formulated now. It has been going on through the times. We saw former Prime Minister I.K. Gujral actually attach a lot of premium to it, and then Prime Minister Modi gave it a lot of push in his neighborhood first policy. And there are two kind of challenges that we are talking about here. One would be the policy challenges by themselves. I mean, ours is a very complex neighborhood where we have shared, as they say, destinies, shared histories, shared geographies. And ours is again a region where we see extremism, terrorism, you name it and we have it. We have seen so many political disputes rise over the years, and especially with China's rise, our challenges have increased the most. So whatever we see today, I mean, we are not just looking at an LOC situation now. India prepares for a two-front war or a two-and-a-half-front war situation. The LSC has become the hot LOC now with what happened in Galwan since 2020. So, and if for all your students, I would advise them that go through these policy speeches that are made by foreign secretaries, external affairs minister, and all of them are there on the MEA website. If you were to go to the MEA website, when they give in their broad policy formulations, what has changed in the last 6-7 years now is you have a distinct cautioning and alertness about China in all statements. So all these broad policy vision statements and speeches now start by saying that China is our biggest challenger and our biggest challenge that we need to formulate to compete with. So anybody who's coming into IFS really needs to keep an eye out on what is happening with China. The language constraints. For the longest time, we actually had people who spoke Russian more. We didn't have too many people who were Mandarin speakers across our IFS systems. That has changed over the last few years. We have seen many of these Mandarin speakers actually rise to much senior positions, foreign secretary to national security advisors, and most of them were being drawn in from China. So, because you're not looking at China simply from that earlier, the pearl string concept or just encircling you within South Asia or in Asia. Now you have the entire Indo-Pacific theater, which has become one of the most active theaters of war. So for any IFS student, one is of course the policy challenge, and the biggest policy challenge I would say, other than of course a very hostile Pakistan or the complex situation in Afghanistan, you would have the policy challenges that you're facing from China of how to go about it, because this is not a challenge that is going to go away anytime soon. If anything, this is only going to rise.
Right.
Structurally within the IFS, I think the one thing that has been said about many a times, it was also mentioned a lot by Dr. Shashi Tharoor in one of his books. I think it was either Elephant and the Tiger or Pax Indica, where he talks about the low strength of the Indian foreign services, especially for a country the size of India. When you compare it to, say, a country much smaller in size like a Singapore, our proportions are very skewed.
Right.
In 2020, we did see announcements of some major reforms where, it was announced that the MEA structure would have more verticals. They were creating more additional secretaries to lead these posts. Lateral entries of people into divisions were called for and allowed to open up for expertise. But despite that, if you still look at the numbers, I had them somewhere. So the sanction strength was basically 960. Looking at a 1.4 billion plus country. In March 2019, the figure was actually 795. We are now looking at 820, 840. We're still not at a number. Even if you were to go into the maximum strength of 960, I mean, the cadre strength really needs to go up. So the resource problem is definitely one of the key issues that IFS people are facing, because the way our diplomacy has changed so much. I mean, now you do entire focuses on diaspora. That takes up your time. The evacuations of citizens. It started, of course, way back. We've seen that in Libya, in Yemen, in Kuwait in the 90s. We have become better at it. We've become smarter at it. But these evacuations involve a whole lot of personnel. I mean, if you have an MEA control room running in 24/7, they are flooded with thousands of emails, thousands of phone calls on a daily basis from Indian students, say in Ukraine, to be able to handle them all, to be able to process them all. So the resources, which is the original problem of the structuring of the IFS, obviously they wanted the creme de la creme. They wanted good people, talented people to come in. But how do you balance talent in diplomacy with the kind of work that is increasing? There's this very interesting book by Eric Schmidt and somebody else, which I think deals with the way diplomacy today is being done in the online world versus the offline world. So you have an entire virtual diplomacy too that is happening. So which means added workloads. It is of course a very challenging job. You have the perks of the job too. Somebody who loves to face new challenges literally on a daily basis. But the other, just the last thing I think would say is also be prepared in the kind of polarizing political atmosphere that we live in today. What is unfortunate is that we have also seen a lot of politicization of the IFS happening increasingly. There are a few retired diplomats who are saying that current diplomats need to ensure that there is a pushback, something we have seen within the US happen during Trump's time when he was trying to bring out all these bans on migration, on entry of immigrants, especially Muslims. There was pushback that happened from State Department and others. So I don't know if that is possible, because that is, I think, a larger question for bureaucracy itself, which a lot of people grapple with, that do bureaucrats always agree to the political diktat of the day? Are you allowed to revolt or not? But how do you find your way of making your voice heard, so that at least the serious objections, instead of becoming a yes minister diplomat, how do you make your serious objections and insights known? So be prepared for that as well, because I think these will be very crucial in how your own career in IFS then pans out.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Now, ma'am, there is a question with regards to public policy.
Okay.
And it is said that public policy, it's a very complex area. And we have seen lots of questions being asked in personality test. Like, ideally, public policy should be driven by collective interests, mass interest, not by politics of appeasement and immediate political gains. But unfortunately, we find the opposite trend in our country. Like, collective interest, again, is being ignored, and short-term political expediency take the master seat. What are your views on this? And what can be the corrective measures?
See, I think it's a sweeping statement to say that what is a decision taken on a political basis does not serve a collective interest. I would have my differences there, because we are a very political country. I mean, politics is in our DNA. I mean, be it a youth from Bihar or Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal, the things that dominate our everyday lives is cricket and politics. So when you talk about policies driving to appeasement, I mean, there is always that perpetual question of good economics making for bad politics. And at the end of the day, our election system is one where we are perpetually in election mode. So the windows in between elections are very far and few. You know, by the time we are over with these 5 elections, we will start to prepare for the elections by the end of the year. And unfortunately, a lot of our policies are driven by the fact that, you know, the global crude oil prices, even when they have gone up or whatever it is, through these periods of campaigning, we haven't seen the price review happening for oil.
Right.
So because you chose to do so, you didn't want to hike up the prices when elections were on. I mean, I wonder if you can still do that, but no, you know, now you will need to hike it because elections are over and campaign is over, it is beyond you. So, like in the South, if you see, for instance, while these were policies, say for instance, the Amma canteen, where you were giving food to the poor, and these Dravidian canteens, for 1 rupee or 2 rupee, you're not giving them for free because you're wanting to preserve the sense of self-dignity for the poorest of the poor, that I'm still paying for my meal. But you are serving a warm meal, a hot, nutritious meal to the poor people. These were launched with an eye on political vote banks. To say that these policies were launched completely because you only thought of the public and not because you wanted to save your chair at the term of, you know, 5 years, or to be able to fight the next elections, that would be being naive. So I think there's no harm if you're wanting to make policy, because, you know, Uttar Pradesh is a classic case. And I wouldn't call myself a political expert, whatever little I understand by going to the ground. In Uttar Pradesh, of course, the election results are aside, whatever happens on election day, but there are a lot of caste and communities that have benefited through some of these political programs that, say, for instance, have been launched by under the flagship, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. And that seems to have helped a lot of communities where if you're trying to work out, say for instance, a new caste equation, a new political dynamic, some of these that you're trying to address, Manrega for instance, or Food Safety Act, these are all policies that had collective benefits. But when you announce them, the back of your mind is that, of course, this is a vote bank that you are appealing to. That if I announce these safety security nets, while it also helps our economy, give it a protection, for India, one of our biggest challenges today is the urban poverty that we are dealing with.
Right.
Even more than the rural economy crisis or our farming crisis. It's the urban economy and the urban poverty which is real problematic. So you do need these safety security nets and the social spendings on these kind of policies.
Right.
So I don't mind if you're launching it with a view on your voter, as long as you're launching it and you're implementing it, not just launching it. So
that means there is no inherent difference between the two.
I mean, in a democracy, at the end of the day, look, the point is, दो चार difference हो सकता है, that whether you're following a capitalist model, whether you're following a socialist model, you cannot have 100% socialist model anywhere anymore.
Right.
It would be utopian to have it. Because you are balancing out the state responsibility with the rights of the individual today. And the individuals wouldn't want a complete market control by the state. So under these kind of constricted limitations and new dynamics and developing, changing situation, you have an aspirational society today in India. We have a young demographic wise country, which could also turn into a ticking bomb if you were not able to provide them jobs. Yeah, the larger questions, I mean, when it comes to questions of disinvestment, of public sector disinvestments, these are questions where, yes, your political interests should be in the backseat and you should let the experts take over and take control.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Now, ma'am, with regards to electoral reforms, you talked about we are perpetually in electoral mode. So many reforms have been carried out, introduced by Election Commission, Supreme Court, and the government itself. But they are not completely successful in eliminating money power, and that is also in a way affecting public policy, how a policy is being formulated. So do you think lobbying should be legalized in India like US?
I'll come to the second part of your question in a bit, because that's a dodgy question, and one, frankly speaking, I don't have a clear opinion on, but I'll just share my 2 cents if it's worth it. But in terms of the electoral reforms, look, I don't think that we can have any electoral reforms unless we actually reform the election spendings. It has become a huge challenge today. And I have these conversations with a lot of young leaders who are coming into politics, or young women, for instance. If it's Women's Day, we celebrate women and their achievements and all of that. How many women on a daily basis without a family background or a dynasty connection have that many resources to be able to take a dive? There are some organizations that have come up in the South, or a democracy forum, that are trying to crowdsource money to be able to, push, say, women and young people with clean images. Because fighting elections today has become an exorbitant affair. For an MLA election, the conservative estimate is that a candidate is spending anywhere between a 6 crore to 10 crore rupees. For somebody like me, I can't even think of it in the wildest of my imaginations. I mean, even after I auction off my lung, liver, kidney, you'll still not have money to be able to finance your elections. So till you don't address that root cause, you cannot treat cancer with migraine pills. You cannot have reforms, because when people are coming in and they know that the next election, if not earlier, will happen in 5 years, when I may or may not still be able to retain my chair, these people who are spending so much of money in fighting one election will want to find ways to make that money when they are in offices of power. So that's a very big issue. Second, when you talk about electoral reforms, the one thing that people don't focus on is the reforms within the Election Commission itself. A key one that has been pending for 2 decades. And I was recently having a conversation with Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, the former Chief Election Commissioner, and he pointed out, because he was also a part of the delegation that has been trying to bring about this change, when you look at the permanency of the tenure, the Chief Election Commissioner has it. It's a 3-bodied Election Commission of India. They are the apex body. But the 2 ECs, they don't have permanency of tenure, though they have voting rights. So when you go into a voting room, you're not going in as equals. You're going in as somebody who thinks that, because I don't have a permanency, the way I vote may have consequences for me from the political setup of the day. And that could swing your opinion. I'm not saying that everybody does, but there are cases that have happened. There are enough controversies that abound. So the Election Commission itself also needs to be able to take positions of leadership when it comes to all throughout the elections. We see these notices being sent, but more often than not the commission comes across as a paper tiger or as a toothless tiger. So you have to give them real power for them to be autonomous enough. There have been some very significant reforms that have happened. Of course, we always talk about the TN Session and James Lindo, about the kind of contributions that they've made to the Election Commission. But to be able to make the political electoral reforms in the country, we also need to reform the Election Commission itself and give it more powers enough so that it can have independence from the powers of the day and does not feel forced to be compromised. So these are challenges in coming to your betting question. Frankly, I don't have a view of it. But yes, I do know for sure that in India too, there are a lot of think tanks today, and major ones, that are supported, financed by very big corporate houses, which have conflicts of interest. So in the US, when you're dealing with a think tank or a group, at least you know of their credentials. Right. You know very clearly of their leanings, of their alignments, of where the money is coming in from, and if they are selling you a product, why they are selling so. The problem is in advocacy, look, there are thin lines. I could be advocating something as a policy because I firmly believe in it. But I could have somebody advocating the same thing because there is either a quid pro quo happening or some other interest where either money exchanges hand or favors exchange hand. Right. In that case, if legalizing lobbying helps in making the intentions of those who are into advocacy clearer, then maybe yes, go for it. But this is something that I would want to study a bit more before, taking a final position, really.
Great. Ma'am, we talked about we are a democracy, vibrant democracy, and etc., largest democracy. But why is inner party democracy missing in most of the political parties in India? What is your opinion on that?
My sense is, I think it has got to do with the way the leadership of parties has shaped up. And especially as we have moved increasingly, while we are still in a parliamentary form of democracy, to presidential style of elections, where faces have become important. So the leadership cult has become important. Today, if you're looking at national elections, the question that will always be asked by people is, who will be the face to challenge Mr. Modi? It will not be what will be the idea to challenge him. India has seen the coalition era politics through the 80s, through the 90s. We have seen weaker governments. We have seen governments in minority ruling. But if you look at all the party structures today, whether it is regional or whether it is at the national level, most of them, are dealt with figures who are very strong-headed people. So even a party like the Aam Aadmi Party today, which may appear to be a new idea in politics, and it tried presenting an alternate idea post the Anna Hazare movement in 2013, and which is something that appealed to people. They were wanting to try and experiment with alternate models or political structures. So it looked to them like the Aam Aadmi Party had emerged from the grassroots level, with actually the Aam Aadmi or the ordinary people rising to the top, coming in, coalescing into a grouping that coalesced further into a political party. But even within the party today, off camera, people would tell you that the decision making really remains at the top. So it's a top-down approach, be it a Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal, who would rather want to give her leadership baton to her nephew Abhishek Banerjee, be it a Shiromani Akali Dal, which is being led by a family. Dynasty politics is not just for one party here. Be it a Shiv Sena, be it a Samajwadi Party, you have it as a problem. Or the southern states, where leaders have forever, all these people who have had acting careers come into political spaces, they have always been treated as larger than life, as gods, as cults. Right. So they literally have cadres, they literally have people जो उनकी पूजा करते हैं.
Right.
So it makes a difference when you have this, even within the BJP today. The BJP that goes on to accuse every other party of dynasty politics. The structure itself, when it comes to decision making, it has a parliamentary committee, it has vice presidents, it has general secretaries. But the decision making at the end of the day remains with the top 2 or 3 men at best. Right. I mean, if the top 2 leaders decide that this is what is going to happen, then the party will have to fall in place. So similarly for the Congress. And at the end of the day, they still need the Gandhis to be a glue for them, and which has plunged the party into the grand old party, into the kind of leadership identity crisis that we see today. So I think much of it stems from the insecurity of these leaders. If you look at, and I also like to say that a lot of time in women leaders, for instance, in India, if it was the late Jayalalitha or a Mayawati or a Mamata Banerjee, often in this male-dominated political culture, they are projected as whimsical, they are projected as some, they really are insecure women. But these women who have made it to the top have actually struggled so much, and struggled not just by virtue of having to fight elections, but they have faced physical abuse. They have had their skulls cracked, their saris battered in assembly. So the real physical challenge to them has been way more than their male counterparts.
Right.
When these people come to the top, unfortunately, while we are a part of a democratic system, I think it could stem from the fact that you think that what you are doing is in the best interest of the party. The party goes along because they think that you are their best bet to be in power, and nobody comes to politics and not wants to be in power. Mm-hmm. So, or it could simply be because, you become so insecure when you're on the top that you tend to be lonelier than perhaps when you were moving up. Mm-hmm. So it's way away from ideal, but, when you have people revolting, when you have resignations happen, at least these are signs that things are still processing, the body is working. So.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. You are from media, ma'am.
Yeah.
And prime time news have generated interests, viewerships, but also distorted opinions of masses. Now, as an aspirant who is preparing for civil services, or a common man, how can we filter the truth from post-truth?
It is a question that, of course, I can delve into at length. We can have a longer chat about it. But there are a couple of things here. First of all, the very concept of primetime news has undergone massive transformation now. From the days when we were kids, we were growing up, it used to be a family tradition to be sitting in front of the television waiting for that 9 o'clock news, right, or that 8 o'clock news. You had faces that no matter what, you didn't want to miss out on. These were habits that were practiced by your parents. Mm-hmm. The family would sit in that couch, not just to watch a movie together, but to watch news together. Mm-hmm. Today, in this internet era, you are watching news constantly.
Right.
And we are in an era what I would define as an infodemic. You have too much of information to access. And not all of it, of course, is news that you can rely on. There are some very basic things. One is a regular smell test. If some news really sounds fishy, more often than not, it is fake. Mm-hmm. B, I think as we talk about the expansion of the digital media, the importance of traditional media has grown so much more. So for your UPSC aspirants, I know that the students tend to follow say for instance, the Hindu a lot. Why so? Because it's one of those organizations that has still maintained a consistent credibility for more than 100 years. I worked with the Tribune for almost 2.5, 3 years. And the paper, even though it may not have a huge subscription base, it has a very small circulation, but it's a very, very important paper for a frontline state like Punjab, Jammu Kashmir. And lawmakers sitting in New Delhi actually tend to read that paper. And the paper, the employees know, people like us when we were working, that we would go through a grueling process where whatever we were filing, each word was being read and processed by editors who had adequate years of experience. So for any traditional media house, be it a Deccan Herald, be it a Telegraph, those processes are still there. Filtering of news, of trying to talk to your sources and not just using your organization as a media plant. But trying to verify also information from at least 2 sources, if not 3. This has also brought forth the rather big challenge that newsrooms need to invest in resources. You have some fake news busting organizations today that are working and they're doing an excellent job. You have some Google initiatives, you have an alt news, you have a webcoof and things like that in Boombox. But there needs to be more investment in this because the dangers of alternate truths as it is being projected, the dangers of disinformation, fake news, even in this Ukrainian-Russian crisis, it is so huge. And a lot of times when you read even the traditional media, what your aspirants need to be careful about is the leanings and the framings of organizations so that you have a better understanding. Look, you can always form better opinion as long as you know that what is it that you're dealing with. For instance, if you are watching a Turkish station today, TRT World, you need to keep it in your mind. You watch them for perspective, but you keep it in your mind that when they are reporting on the Ukrainian crisis, they will have as a state TV a certain interest of the government or the party that will be put out. Similarly, if there is an India-Pakistan crisis, for anybody who is a third country player, if they're watching Doordarshan for information, they will know that, yes, I'm watching this information, but it comes with a certain government leaning. It's not a fully autonomous body that you're talking about, or a PTV in Pakistan for that matter. So you need to understand of the, in US, a lot of newspapers during presidential elections, they actually bat candidates openly. And closer to the elections, you wait for the editorials of, say, a Washington Post, a New York Times, or a Guardian in UK, because they make it clear as to which candidate they are going forward with, which is a good thing. In India, we have too much of advertorials that happen, and especially in political advertorials, where political plants and interests are actually planted in stories, which are paid for, but not mentioned clearly. And this is a very common problem that you have, especially with the regional press, with the vernacular press, with some of the largest circulated dailies too. So, if something sounds fishy online, it will possibly be fishy. The traditional media houses are still better. Be very careful of what is floating on in social media. I'll just give a very small example. And I personally have also, it's not like we are completely immune to everything all the time. For all the steps that we take, when the incident happened, unfortunately, in Nagaland recently, in Oting, where an encounter went haywire and civilians were killed and the situation inflamed. So I was sent a video from Nagaland of these group of young boys inside the coal mine singing by a very senior author who I respected and believed in. So I thought that if she is sending me, it would be a credible video. So I tweeted it. And I put it on Twitter saying that this was perhaps the last video of the young boys, because they were also coal miners who were shot dead before they were killed. And then within a few minutes, because I had also sent it to some relatives for checking, the relatives reverted saying that these are not the boys. That these are boys in a mine which is located nearby. So the decent thing to do then was, I apologized. I deleted that tweet, of course. I apologized for it too, and I said that I've made a mistake. I accept it. I shouldn't have. But so these things can happen as long as it is inadvertent. it is acceptable. We are all humans, we are all prone to errors. As long as a newsroom is accepting and correcting if it makes an error of judgment or if it puts out a wrong news or a fake news, it is all right, give them a chance. But if this is deliberate disinformation, then you need to run for your life from them.
Great. Thank you, ma'am. Means you need to refer to more than one source.
Absolutely.
Go for traditional media and cross-check it. Great.
And depending on your area of interest, for perspectives,
Yes,
you need to look at which region, what story are you talking about, think about the expert voices in those specific sectors,
Right.
and make informed opinions.
Great. Ma'am, last question, if you permit.
Sure.
The question is related to the takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban forces, which actually pushed back the women in Afghanistan by more than a decade. In this light, how can international development agencies and countries like India contribute towards improving their state of affairs or their condition?
Well, for India right now, while we've always enjoyed a lot of goodwill and the kind of aid assistance that we have sent in towards the humanitarian building of Afghanistan, unfortunately for us, a lot was lost when the Taliban took over for the second time last year in August, something that we clearly hadn't seen coming in such a short span of time. And right now, India is not directly in the room.
Right.
So that limits us. That constrains us. But having said that, I think it is never enough to use your offices to leverage whatever influence you have. We have had some formal, informal contacts with the Taliban. Of course, India would want to secure its own strategic interests first in its conversations, the roads that we've built, the dams, our hydropower projects that we're running there, that we would like to secure them. But it goes back to that principled position in, where we were talking about in the first answer itself.
Right.
That you can be realistic. You don't have to be idealistic, but stand up for principled positions. Women today in Afghanistan are missing from the negotiations room. They're missing from anywhere where the actual policies are being worked out. And it's unfortunate and sad that the very Taliban that is talking to some of the, if I may say so, the foreign women in contingencies who are coming in through the UN, they're not talking to their own women. Now we have seen images of some of the colleges, universities open up, which earlier used to be co-ed, where students used to mingle together. Now some women in hijab are being allowed to sit on one side of the classroom, and they've done away with, a lot of the male teachers in women's classrooms and things like that. But you will have to raise your voice for these Afghans. I mean, we could have done a lot more when those evacuations happened. We could have given a lot more visas. Unfortunately, we only gave a few hundred to Afghans. Most of the evacuations that happened post that Kabul fall was of Indians itself. But in terms of scholarships, in terms of visas to young students, India really needs to put its money where its mouth is and to take up leadership, because in Afghanistan, I was just looking at a Human Rights Watch report which talks about the women in media, and they have been completely devastated by the Taliban. So when you cut off your information access, the world stops seeing what is happening on the ground. The world is only seeing what you are presenting to them.
Right.
So you need to find ways of supporting such women who are either doing independent journalism or doing journalism and whatever work they are doing under very, very difficult circumstances today without getting into the direct hairs of the Taliban. You wouldn't want such interference. You're very, very clear about, any external, even the proposition of mediation interference is rejected or very strongly by us. So you wouldn't want to do that by impinging upon another position of authority in another country. But there are ways of going about using development aid and assistance. When you're sending out wheat to the Taliban, when you are sending out humanitarian food and medicines to the Taliban, can you add conditions? Can you say that we will do it as long as we see that there are women who are also a part of this organization? So I think at the end of the day, it is about speaking out and speaking out consistently, maybe not in the public sphere, because then it leads to a lot of ego clashes, but every time that you have an opportunity behind closed doors to be able to raise these issues very strongly.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this candid, honest, and very refreshing conversation, ma'am. And hopefully it will solve and resolve the doubts of the students which pertains to public policy, media, journalism, India's position at international arena, Ukraine-Russia crisis, with regards to political and electoral reforms and different aspects of political parties and electoral system we have. Thank you so very much, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that your students and the people who watch this find it useful in some measures at least. And all the very best to all the aspirants who are working so hard for all the civil service examinations.
Thank you, ma'am.